You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. This is Forhad. Hope you are all well and safe. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. Uh, Incredibly, we are recording our 50th episode today. And for that, we're actually doing two things, which we have never done before. One is we're trying the video. I can't promise that we're going to publish the video, but we're trying it. And two, we're actually doing it in person, which this is actually the first time that we've done it in person. And there's probably only one person on the planet that could get me to do that. And fortunately for us, he's our guest today. So to commemorate our 50th episode, we wanted to do something special. And what we decided was that we were going to go back to our roots. And I'll explain that a little bit later in the episode, but let me introduce our guest first, Gus Lipman. Thanks so much for joining me, Gus.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
You know what? This is a long time coming, and I'm super excited about this episode. So let me explain what I mean by going back to our roots. Uh, Three of the four principles of Integris Intelligence started our careers at Guardsmark. Myself, Tony, and Rob. And so, needless to say, we were grateful for the opportunity. We learned a ton there, and we still use it to this day. And so, what we thought was we'd do an episode where we paid homage to Mr. Lipman, yourselves, and Guardsmark for not only what you did for us, but what you did for thousands and thousands of people throughout the nation and, in fact, globally, right? At the end. And so hopefully you understand how much you have done. And, we'll talk about it throughout the episode. So, does that describe generally kind of our relationship in terms of how we met and all that sort of stuff was at Guardsmark?
Well, that's how we met. I don't think it describes the warmth and regard I have, my family has for you and your colleagues, and what you've done at Integris. So, hasn't mentioned that, but we're I'm very proud to call you a colleague and a friend.
Well, thank you, Gus. That means a lot. So most of our audience members are going to know you, and they're going to know who you are and your background. But perhaps you can provide a high-level overview of your background.
Well, I spent my entire career in the security industry. At the earliest age, I was put on top of the conference room table and told to walk across the table and give a dividend check to one of our early investors when I was 3. Worked in the mailroom over the years, shipping out daily reports, printed daily reports to the branches in 42-pound boxes, going here and there during the summers, and then working as a security officer, and then working in various levels at Guardsmark, and then up to the chief operating officer position when we sold in 2015. And then after that, became an investor in a group called Circadian Risk, which I'm now the chairman, which is a physical risk assessment software as a services group, and then served as the chief executive officer for Voyager Analytics USA, providing artificial intelligence solutions to the security, defense, and intelligence communities. And then have become a partner recently in January of this year with SKL Capital to invest in security, defense, and intelligence companies and opportunities, in addition to my responsibilities as the chairman of Circadian Risk.
In addition to your responsibilities at home.
In addition to my responsibilities at home, and then the other thing that I am proud of, a legacy of commitment in philanthropy, both at the professional level philanthropy in terms of impact in uh, business oriented but still philanthropic interest, as well as other interests in philanthropy.
Sure. Sure. Well, so obviously going back to the roots, Guardsmark leads to one place, right? Your dad, Ira Litman. Can you talk a little bit about him?
Well, I mean, we could take the whole, session to talk about him. First of all, if everyone should know that if you knew me and knew him, you knew that I had an enormous regard and special relationship, with my father. I worked with him. I had the honor of working with my grandfather as well, and watching the special relationship that he had with my father. Uh, you know, what I would just say very succinctly was he had a commitment to excellence. He took great pride in the results of the people that he put in the company on the field to perform, and wanted to make sure that they were successful. And if they didn't succeed, he actually took that as his failure, not as their failure.
Right. Right.
But he celebrated their success. And if you remember winning Wednesdays and terrific Thursdays, that was the happiest moments. More so about the security officers, than giving out the big checks to the great, business leaders in the company.
That was fun too, though.
That was fun too. I think you probably had a nice watch on your wrist.
I do as a result of Mr. Lipman. So, but there's a story around that which we'll discuss another time. But so you talked about being a 3-year-old handing out checks. Are those your earliest memory of the company?
Yes, that is that's my earliest memory of the company. The dynamic associated with walking into the building at 22 South 2nd in Memphis, and then walking into branch offices with my father, and then I used to travel around with him. And this is back in the 70s, and we were coat and tie on the plane, traveling around. And I was,
Yes.
I was, less than 10 years old, running around with him. Great pleasure. I used to sit at 5 years old. I would go to, insurance conferences where he was speaking. I would doodle, at 5, but I would, it took great pleasure in actually spending time with him and actually being a part of, working with him.
Okay, so I remember all that about Mr. Lipman, but I also remember one other thing, and I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of people watching this episode or listening to the episode that are going to hold my feet to the fire. And if I don't call you out on certain things, I'm going to get it, right?
All right.
So one of the things that Mr. Lipman was very keen on, which, by the way, I still follow, Gus apparently does not, was no facial hair. So tell us about the growth of the facial hair.
Okay. I grew a beard after I had surgery on my shoulder, and really had, I would have found a way to shave, but I was going to, grow it out that summer. And this is before, obviously, he passed away. And his initial reaction was he didn't like it. But then he looked at it, and actually he did like it.
Okay.
And he said, if you're going to have that, and you're going to then make sure you have it manicured and take in and actually enjoy every week or 10 days or something, getting it trimmed, and I do that, and I enjoy it. I tell you, my wife loves it.
Okay.
I have a lot of friends that have come up to me and told me that they love it, and I probably have a lot of friends who actually are biting their lip and haven't told me that they don't like it. But I will tell you, as a Yankee fan, if I were asked today, and based on how badly they've been playing, this might happen.
Yeah.
If I needed to play third base for the New York Yankees, and they said sign this and shave, and you'll be on the field tonight, I would shave.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. I would hope you would. So getting back to Guardsmark, and you've said it, I've said it, and thousands of others have said it. What do you think differentiated the company from everybody else?
I think at the very early stages, genesis of Guardsmark, going back into the 60s, uh, Guardsmark was committed to being different than the industry and really offering much more than in the early days, the fire watch, or the very basic level of service, and really integrating a more sophisticated model. And as the country became more sophisticated, as the times became more complicated, Guardsmark continued to innovate in that area. And if you look at the early 70s and the hijackings of the airports, Guardsmark was one of the leaders in coming in and airport security, to help solve that problem. And my father was one of the innovators, and this is referenced in his, story that came out just after he passed away that was in Forbes Online, about how important he was in providing leadership and insight in best practices to secure the airports in pre-departure screening following the 70s. So as it's been a commitment to excellence, elevation of the industry. It's been a commitment to making security important, value centric, buy, and where you're saving lives, you're saving secrets, intellectual property,
Yes.
and you're saving assets, physical assets.
Yep, for sure. So what are some of the things you remember the most about the company and being with it and your family, your father?
I mean, I remember so much. I grew up in the business. We sold when I was 44. So 44 years of experience. I remember legislative fights. I remember people who were difficult in fighting in terms of the competitors
Mhm.
fighting us and then telling us after the fact, thank God we did it for the industry, that they didn't have the guts or didn't want to spend the money. And this is what they're telling me, privately, that thankfully we took the lead. And then hearing that internationally, that thankfully we were a responsible group, leading some of those good fights. And I remember the health insurance fight,
Mhm.
and this is when, and my father had been the chairman of the Young Republicans, and had a lot of friends on, both sides. I would really say he was a moderate in terms of politically. So I only mention that because we were just doing what we thought was best for our employees.
Right.
It wasn't anything political about, oh, we're taking a big stance and we believe in health insurance for, we believed in wanting to have health insurance for our people. And we wanted to do the best we could in the, constraints of the industry.
Sure. Well, interestingly, you mentioned the Yankees. Now, I'm a Met fan, but unfortunately, and no one ever understands this if I use the Mets,
Yes.
right? But, many people always say, like, working for Guardsmark was like starting your major league career playing for the Yankees. It brought, discipline, certain professionalism, high level of performance, and all those sorts of things. So I certainly, as an employee, remember all of those things. So you talked about the impact a little bit.
Farhad,
Yes.
before you go on to the next question, the thumbs up emoji keeps popping up. Gus is using his hands a lot, so that's going to be on the video. I just want to let you know because if you wanted to,
I'll mention something that about that at the end.
okay.
Oh, my hand.
No, when there are certain things that the video catches that
If you do the thumbs up, you'll see it keeps popping up.
Yeah, you got it.
Keep my hands on the table.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
So,
sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm glad I didn't set off an alarm here.
No, but it's okay. Let's go with it because what's going to happen in the end, I'll address that and say this was again our first time. I'm not sure if we're going to publish this way anyway, but
Okay. This was Gus's fault.
This was Gus's fault. Exactly. The impact. What's the impact that you believe the company made on the industry as a whole?
You know, I I think about that frequently, and I think about the commitment to getting health care. I think about the commitment of really looking at physical security as uh, a as a value add, as something that could be a sophisticated buy, as something that would allow us in the industry, not just Guardsmark, to have proprietary business that would never have switched to the security industry in terms of contract security,
Hmm.
move to a contract basis without a level of excellence and detail orientation and sophistication and seriousness. And without that leadership, I think a lot of the industry would still be, a lot more of the industry would be proprietary. And I think there are people, all the major competitors today, all of the major companies
Hmm.
in the sector, I think have benefited from that in that they would not have been able to pry that, the just the cost savings alone on
Yeah.
the outsourcing would not have been enough.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. So, what do you want your family's um, and the company's legacy to be?
Well, I would like the people to think of that Guardsmark as just as the article that came out in Time magazine, that it was different than many people and many of the competitors in the industry. And if we were trying to take a different tack in the wind, and that we were really trying to be innovators and leaders and elevate the industry, uh, really make sure that people realize that there was a career, not just a transitory job, but a career in security and in contract security, and that people could make a difference, and that that we could create an organization and an idea and legitimize an idea that security mattered and that we were impactful in doing that, and that I think it's important that everyone reflect on the fact that my father, and I give him the credit, but I do know that my brothers also share the same sentiments that uh, taking care of the people and how my father took care of the people at the company is something that we're proud of, and that more people need to do that.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely something I could tell you that we took away. Like in terms of when we, it's like anything else. You see things, you like certain things, you don't like. But that's definitely one of the things that we took away from Guardsmark was that there was a general feeling of caring and wanting to uh, give back to the ones that are giving to you every day. So employees. So as we discussed, one of the things that we did, and I got Gus's permission before this, is I sort of canvassed former Guardsmark employees, telling them that I was going to sit down with Gus for this episode, and they and said, what are some questions that you have that perhaps you didn't get a chance to ask or want to know now about him, the company, Mr. Lipman, whatever it was. And I opened it up and we got a pretty big response. So I'm going to ask some of those questions, Gus. So the first one, so all the great things about Mr. Lipman sometimes were challenging as well, right? So one of the things that he did that I knew and many of my colleagues knew was that he was very, very demanding on senior leadership, right? Talk about that a little bit. Why was he so demanding on the leadership team?
Well, first of all, he was demanding on himself,
Yes.
uh, and he was very demanding on me, and he was very demanding on all of the other senior leaders because he was uh, in a hurry as a striver to continue to grow Guardsmark, but grow Guardsmark the right way.
Mhm.
And one of I'm not going to say the person's name, but one of my I'd call it mentors in the company that's not uh, from my family, talked about that Guardsmark could have been the biggest company if we had not done some of the things we believed that were important to the ethics and the fabric of the strategy. We could have been much bigger, but we wouldn't have been the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so so the frustrations with trying to grow, be a business, make more money, in terms of year over year, and hold to firm on all of these things,
Sure.
made it much more of a challenge. Right? So he was demanding, and he was tough.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that the only thing, if someone lied to my father,
Mm-hmm.
that's something he couldn't really tolerate.
Right.
If he could, the lying was but if someone is earnestly doing their very best and they just fell short, he was interested in their growth and their performance.
Well, I can attest to that. And he was, again, he was the ultimate professional and salesperson. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But, one thing that actually a lot of people asked about was the early days. And obviously you weren't there. So, but the early days, can you talk about that a little bit when he first started the company, right? What's the first account that he got? How do you think he managed it? How do you think he did everything?
Like with the Carondelet account or something, and then how did he do it?
Yeah,
Hustle and striving. He was
right.
a striver, and he worked very hard. You hear the stories of, you know, um, whether it was McGraw, or it was Ori Henry,
Yeah.
Dee Dee Nelson. They were inspired. And these are people who they worked 80 hours a week because he worked 85 hours a week,
Right.
and he was hustling,
Right.
and he was doing his very best to create something in Memphis, Tennessee in the 60s.
Yeah.
And he won, when he won the RCA account, when no one expected Guardsmark to even be a finalist, yet he won the contract.
Right.
He won it because he worked everyone, five times the effort, and five times the results, in order to actually win that contract.
Yeah.
So, you look at the early days of the company, it was, nothing more than just, when you look at startups today, somebody, he didn't live in his car like some of these tech startups, but he was probably pretty close.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. So, what do you like the most about him?
What- this is too little
Not enough
uh,
time.
too little time to go through this. Um, he was actually quite funny at certain times, and had a great sense of humor. And when he could actually take a moment to not be in the chair and in command, and watching him sort of play with his grandson and granddaughter, and
Yeah.
to see him in a different scenario. I loved that, and there are a few people who saw that were in the company, but not many. But I'd say that's something, and that's actually one of the things that I do. I regret that he did not have the opportunity to. Firstly, he died too young,
Yeah.
at 78. He should have lived much longer, and he should have enjoyed
Hmm.
his later years.
Hmm. Speaking of how, again, he was a serious guy, especially as young managers when we were all very, very nervous around him. But there was a time when we were at Rock Center, very likely that you were present as well. But he told me I had beautiful eyelashes, and I don't know to this day if he was joking or if I really have beautiful eyelashes. Can you clear that up for us?
I've never thought about it, but Fahad, I think you have beautiful
All
eyelids.
right, excellent. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that. So, all right, so now let's talk about the other side. What are some of the things, looking back on it, that perhaps weren't your favorite things about your dad?
I have to tell you that uh, he was an autodidact in terms of constantly learning, and he was not somebody who actually had, you know, he actually technically did not finish college, but he was reading and he was constantly learning, and he was very detail oriented. And I remember uh, putting my college essays together, and I used a word that I knew was a word. He couldn't find it in his dictionary, so therefore it wasn't a word. And I found it in another dictionary, and
Right.
that dictionary was discredited because it wasn't his dictionary. So that's something that I would, uh, but I also would, I sort of laugh about that. But uh, he was quite a demanding person in that kind of role.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Anything else that comes to mind?
I'm sure, but I'll keep it off the podcast.
Okay, excellent. I appreciate it. So, what were some of the most memorable moments in the company's history?
There's so many. There was. I remember, the winning of the Microsoft contract, the Ford contract,
I remember that.
the Lockheed Martin contract. These were all amazing moments in the history of the company. Um, Recognition for his leadership and getting the um, Private Security Officers Act, approved after years, more than a decade of his efforts, the company's money, uh, you know, where Guardsmark was punching far beyond its weight in the industry to take a leadership position. Uh, his recognition that I would see, I represented him at the board of the Ligue Internationale de Security Surveillance, the International Security League, to see the regard that the company had internationally as a leader, and then looking at, like, this is what America thinks. It's what really they were saying, what Ira Litman thinks is what America thinks.
Right, right.
And that really was meaningful.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I can see that. So, what were some of the tough times in the company's history that you recall, perhaps where Mr. Lipman struggled with certain things, or there were just events that occurred?
Well, I could speak not from personal experience, but from what I remember him telling me
Hmm.
regarding the late 70s,
Hmm.
of which ended up being an opportunity. The company was public. So when the company went public at like a 40 times multiple in like the early 70s.
Mm.
And then the 70s was not a period of significant growth, and the interest rates continued to rise. And, in the industry, that actually, put a challenge. He was constantly interested in the float in terms of the payroll, this
Hmm.
and that. In the late 70s, the stock was depressed,
Hmm.
and he used that as an opportunity to do management buyout of the shares. And in order, to do that, he put a lot of risk. He believed in the company, and it ended up being a great play in the end. But that was the late 70s, were tough.
Sure.
And despite good growth for the company, I didn't know how actually tough that really was. I'm talking about the late 70s, early 80s, like 80,
Right,
80, 81.
right, 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 right. The so one of the things I think we're pretty familiar with is that he was very, very resistant to technology, right? For a long time. Talk about that. Why was he
Yeah.
so resistant to it?
So this is one of these things that, there's a parable about, where there's a old wise man, and something happens in the community, and they say, well, what do you think of it? And he'll say, well, we'll see. At the end, and there's a series of events, and one looks bad, but it ends up saving from this calamity, that calamity.
Yeah.
I'm going to digress for just a moment,
Yeah.
just to say that if you remember, after we went through all that exhaustive work regarding SARS, and Guardsmark's preparedness, regarding avian flu, if his last few years, and he would click people with their elbow, just to give me your elbow. So he wouldn't actually shake hands. People talked about that when he was in the synagogue. They remember that he wasn't doing that. And he died 6 months before the pandemic. So, having studied, and done some work in cybersecurity over the last few years, a lot of systems, also all the systems, especially the internet, was not set up with security included. People have been adding in protocols, and they're constantly looking for filling holes, and then there's new holes, and then filling, and so my father had always surrounded himself with experts in various fields, and he had experts telling him that, well, it's not secure. He had an unbelievable fear of the release of information that was personal identifiable information for his employees and client information. So he was very resistant. And our early days of email, were very clunky in terms of having the RSA cards, and and the challenge, and no one else had that. Everyone else thought, so when I go back to the reason I mentioned this comment about we'll see, if we have a cyber 9/11 or cyber Pearl Harbor type event, and we're all having to reprint things, he'll look like he was prescient about that. I know he was very, and it was a problem with, in terms of competitiveness, and it was a weakness in terms of technology, but he was definitely concerned about that. If you saw the last Mission Impossible movie, and they were all trying to reprint and put everything back on paper in that movie. If he live and he watched that movie, I guarantee you he would say exactly.
I'm right. I was right. Yep. So one of the things, obviously, I think that's most memorable for everybody is the fact that the company eventually sold, right? And that was after many years of not doing that. And so can you talk about that a little bit? What motivated him to sell, and just, a little bit of perspective on that.
So he had told stories over the years that he had been pursued since the 1960s about being acquired. And I'm familiar with some of those stories, and some of those are very casually like, oh, we'd love to buy you, but nothing really beyond that. But I can tell you that we were heavily involved and heavily pursued, actively pursued, aggressively pursued from 2007 until 2015, and looked at and turned down several deals. But what happened with the financial crisis that affected the industry, not just the security industry, but essentially all business, was the extraordinary quantitative easing that allowed for interest rates to go to essentially zero, gave essentially a zero cost of capital to private equity to be able to then roll up and buy companies. And Guardsmark didn't make acquisitions from 1979 on, but what you would learn in business school, and what was really reaffirmed in the industry, in the security industry, is that organic sales should represent 80% of what your sales pipeline should look like, and 20% should come from M&A.
Okay.
During the financial crisis with zero cost interest rates, it inverted, and it was really 20% coming from organic and 80%. And it became a scenario where there's a race to the bottom, a race to higher and higher, what we call DLs, labor percentage of the labor cost, where it kept going up, up, and up, and the valuations of companies that were still around kept going up.
Okay.
They should be going in different directions, but they weren't. It was actually more expensive it was cheaper, to buy a company than it was to actually win a contract and grow it. So that's one thing. And that really created two different choices. And those two choices are not probably what your listeners are thinking. The two choices were sell, or in this case, bring in a private equity group, and then either follow the same strategy or a slightly different strategy. But the options were not sell or don't sell, because we were at an inflection point that we really needed to grow with a financial backer, and we had a plan B if we didn't do that, and that would have been a scenario to have a private equity group come in to be a partner, and then we probably would have been doing not just security services, but having some technology partners, but we would have had partners.
Sure.
My father would have had someone saying, you can do that, or you can't do that, or let's decide together. And that's definitely not something that he wanted to be doing, not just for the style and not just for, this time of his life, but he had not had a partner.
Yeah.
He had not had anybody in that scenario really since he was public in 1979.
Right. And then prior to that, maybe working for your grandfather.
Well, I mean, he worked for my grandfather in sales, for this is in like 62, 63.
Yeah. No, yeah. I gotta say, I have to imagine your dad would have been a nightmare to manage. I will say that in terms of, because he was very.
No,
you don't think so?
I'll tell you why. He was not a nightmare to manage in terms of my grandfather. He had unbelievable regard and respect as a dutiful son for his father. So he would not you're absolutely wrong.
No, I'm referring to later in life.
Oh, just someone.
Like take a private equity group.
John Smith. Private equity.
Yes.
That would have been challenging.
Okay, fair. I think we're in agreement. So let's say you didn't sell, right? What do you think the company would look like today?
If we didn't sell, and we went through a scenario where John Smith, the private equity partner, and my father had complete simpatico and everything worked perfectly on that kind of scenario, the company would be doing security services, and I think we would have done something similar to what we did in the late 80s, where in the late 80s, we shed our last airport security contract because we couldn't get the wages that were necessary to do the job the way we wanted it done. I think we probably would have shed certain industries and really focused on critical infrastructure, things like, the aerospace, defense, chemicals, really the serious buyers of security. I really focused on that in the security services space. And then we would have had strategic partners. So this is actually what I was putting together as a plan B. We would have had strategic partners under the enterprise risk model to provide some of those ancillary services that we had as a mindset that, we would get into a conference room with the chief security officer, and they would tell us what keeps them up at night.
Hmm.
And we would help them find some of those partners, either working with Guardsmark or working directly with the client. But we would have more of those partners, whether strategic alliances or part of an overall organization. But that's
Sure.
probably where we would, and I don't think we would have been in too many more countries.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think we may have been in a few more NATO or Five Eyes countries.
Right, right. It's interesting about other countries. I don't know if you remember, well, you're going to remember. There was a discussion about poss possibly doing business in India or Southeast Asia at one time. I don't even know how long ago
Mhm.
this was. And, everybody looked around the room and said, who can we ask about this, right? And somehow the finger pointed at me, right? And I just remember saying to Jet, um, if you do the math on the highest amount of money you could get on this contract and convert that to US dollars, I mean, you're talking about maybe making whatever, like $300 a month. Is that $300 worth risking this $500 million company? And I just thought that was a funny memory of mine related to, you mentioned the international work.
So that's wisdom that the chief was mentioning.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, the reason you would get into some of those markets is because you're looking at a long-term horizon.
Hmm.
And having been in international meetings and looking at the industry and the security industry specifically
Hmm.
in India, um, that is an important market.
Yeah.
But that is not a market for 5 years, 10 years. That would be an investment for 30 years from now,
Hmm.
saying that we've been here for 20 plus years and that we've got our 100,000th employee.
Right.
And as wages continue to rise in developing countries
Mhm.
like, uh, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan,
Yeah.
or, whatever, South Asia, just in general, that's going to be a key market.
Sure. Yeah. 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 So going back to like some of the events, right? What are some of the events that you miss? Winning Wednesday, Terrific Thursday. We talk about sales conference. There were like Yogi Berra, obviously recently died. A lot of people talked about meeting him.
No, Willie Mays.
Oh, I'm sorry. Willie Mays recently died, and they
Right.
talked about meeting him at one of your dad's events.
These are great events,
Yeah.
and they were fun events. And this is one of the things that you're the CEO of a company. You want to have, you say, I want to have an event with Willie Mays.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to invite my top clients,
Yeah.
and they're gonna, come. The clients. This is not something they get an invitation to
Hmm.
on any regular basis.
Hmm.
And let's have fun with it. That's one of the things a founder, can do. And
Yep.
he had, some of these events. I have great memories of, having, some of our employees, that maybe have sung opera or sung, in like maybe the Mikado or something,
Hmm.
having, putting them on the spot and singing in front of everybody, and just a sense that it's like, we're one big organization,
Hmm.
family organization.
Yeah.
So I love all those events. I will tell you that some of my favorite events were a dinner after a president's meeting, a drink with maybe two or three people after a president's meeting,
Hmm.
and really getting to know people. And that may have been a little bit more difficult being the boss's son, because, until people realize that,
Yep.
that we're all on the same page. I'm not, chief of intelligence operations.
Yep.
I'm really wanting their success,
Yep.
and I'm really interested. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed, getting to know some of the people, and we had wonderful people in the organization. So that's whether it's a coffee with a Bill Canane,
Yep.
a drink with Bill Canane. I'm going to get myself in trouble, late being Bill Canane, but there's so many wonderful people in the organization.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, speaking of wonderful people, talk about this is a hard question, right? Talk about some, I don't know, I wouldn't say favorite, but some of the people you remember. Like what comes to top of mind when I say who are some of the people that you remember? You mentioned Bill Kinane, so I'm assuming him.
I mean, Bill Kinane, Dave Zadie, Weldon Kennedy, from the FBI world. Obviously, Jim Tomlinson, Bill Gavin. I mean, just amazing people. Jim DeSarno, Joe Johnson. Um, uh,
Some memorable
you know,
clients. Who
I
are
mean,
some of the
I
clients?
mean, hold on. I haven't given you enough names.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. I don't want to get
I
you
just
into
threw out the
trouble.
FBI people.
Yeah.
Jim Antonelli. I mean, Bob
I was
Jensen.
gonna say, don't forget that salesman from California.
Absolutely. Listen, I remember riding the car with Bob, going on sales calls, and having the pleasure of seeing going on calls, eventually.
Yep.
And then his presentations, Jim later on. But I mean, I have to tell you, the quality of the people. I remember, Ronalds I remember working on the Microsoft contract and sitting there with, obviously IAL and,
Hmm.
you know, um, um, you know, Bob Jensen, Jim Antonelli, uh, I mean, there are too many people for me
Hmm.
to. I mean, I remember R.A. Henry. I remember D.D.
Yeah.
Nelson.
Yeah.
I remember W.R. McGraw. I mean, amazing people. You know, uh, Overman.
Hmm.
Who had plenty of quirks, and
Yes, he did.
we're not going to go through
Yeah, let's
those.
not.
But he was an amazing person.
Yeah.
He really was. Um, you know, the late Zane Klein, who was
Hmm.
and working with Gary Leviton, who initially was Zane's deputy, and then really became not just a good but a great general counsel of the company.
Yeah.
Um, you know, our insurance. I'm going to get myself in trouble. I almost need to go through the entire, building.
Mike Trawick,
You know,
Sandy Pizer.
Mike Trawick, Sandy Pizer, Joe Green.
Yeah.
I mean, Melvin Mackey. There were a lot of people that made a big impact.
Yeah.
In the company. I mean, Jeff Westcott, Jerry Jocks, Doris Whitten. You're going to get me in trouble
No,
with
I didn't prep. I didn't prep. Yeah.
I remember Ramona Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the field. I mean, we had the best teams we truly did. I mean, our worst branch was probably the best branch for
Yeah.
a competitor.
Sure. No, and I didn't prep Gus for this question, so don't.
So for
forgive him.
everybody who I didn't name, I apologize, and there's more love for you.
Yeah. You know what? One story about Gus, which I've told you before, that really I think epitomizes like just it shows the kind of person you are. So I'm Muslim, and I fast every Ramadan, and I remember I was called up to Rockefeller Center for something during Ramadan, and it was around sundown, and we were in one of the conference rooms, and you recognized that it was sundown, and you went and got your yogurt for me from the kitchen and gave it to me to break fast. So I'll always remember that. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of thoughtful guy that Gus is, and one of the reasons why I have just a tremendous amount of respect for you. So moving on, talk about your brothers a little bit. We didn't talk about your brothers at all, and perhaps you could reflect on your mom and your grandma as well. Just touch on it.
Well, the one thing about my brothers is my father always, so he bought us jackets when we were like baseball type jackets that said Lipman on the back, and then he didn't really want us to wear them because obviously that's not exactly a great security, scenario, but he bought them symbolically for us to make sure that we realized we were on the same team, that we were working for each other's success, not against each other.
Sure.
So that's one thing that I would highlight about my brothers, and I had the privilege and the pleasure of working with them, and I have, I believe, a great relationship with my brothers, and I'm proud of that. One lives in Memphis and one lives in Seattle, and then my late mother was a great uh, sense of inspiration and how she fought through very serious illness, stroke in 1996, which really, in many respects, changed. Was an impactful thing for the company, by the way, in that my father became her primary. I mean, he had plenty of assistants with nurses and this and that, but primary caregiver, as opposed to previously, um, not having those, significant, concerns, and not having her her physical, not just emotional support, but her physical support
Hmm.
for, his, dedication and focus on the business. My and My grandmother was very detail oriented, was very tough, and very fun. And she, I believe, helped. She probably had a lot of my father's sales dynamic that she passed on to
Hmm.
him, and gregariousness and that sense of fun and joy. And I would see that in my father, those aspects of my grandmother, who lived to be 99 in 6 months,
Hmm.
and was, checking on us on 9/11 from the Amazon River.
Hmm.
So, she had a great sense of,
Yep, she did.
energy and joy and enthusiasm.
For sure. One thing I forgot to ask you about, which I'm sure has come up over the years, is during the events, the white milkman outfits. What was the significance
Well, they
behind?
weren't milkmen, but first of all, IAL would love on vacations, hot vacations, or in terms of tropical vacations or summer vacations, to wear all white.
Hmm.
And think about where we were.
Yeah, Memphis.
We're in
Yeah.
Memphis in the summer, so we weren't going to wear dark colors.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the white colors looked clean.
Yeah.
If you remember when they had some nautical, and those nautical shirts, those are actually people to this day ask me, do we have extras
Yeah.
here and there, because they really looked terrific, and they did. But it had nothing to. There was no symbolism
Hmm.
or anything. It was just, frankly, it was just cooler.
Well, that answers
From a
it.
temperature side.
Yeah, that answers it. So going back to you and your brothers, who was IAL's favorite son?
Well, I would, first of all, I already told you that we all were wearing the same jackets.
Yeah.
So whoever asked that question probably doesn't know that uh, he didn't. If he had a favorite, he wouldn't tell us who the favorite was,
Sure.
or if he told that person, that I never heard it. If you wanted to ask, I don't think any one of my brothers would say throw out a specific name.
Yep.
Um, you know, we did different things in the business, and but I don't think he had a favorite.
Sure. Um, well, I appreciate you answering all the questions and taking it so gracefully. Do you have any questions for me related to Guardsmark, my experience, my feelings, anything that you have that you want to ask? And you don't have to. I'm just throwing that out there to you.
Well, it's just something you might want to react upon,
Hmm.
and people have asked me about, you asked earlier about the legacy, and I would actually say that the thing that actually impacts the legacy of Guardsmark is when people like you and Tony and others in the industry that are leading security organizations or security departments or whatever
Hmm.
grow their businesses, grow their careers, and then do it and say, perhaps accurately or perhaps just deferentially, that their Guardsmark experience was impactful on their career, or they learned how to do something the
Hmm.
right way from their Guardsmark experience. That is that cements the legacy of what Guardsmark means. So when how do you celebrate? When someone does great work, like you're doing here at Integris and other places, you are celebrating Guardsmark and
Definitely.
the legacy of Guardsmark. So I'm actually, I applaud all of the security leaders around the country that post Guardsmark are making a difference.
Yep.
And following what I said earlier in the podcast, that security is important, it's serious, it's more highly regarded, and they are highly regarded, and they are Guardsmark alumni.
No, there's no question about that. And one thing I would add is, I think things are relative, right? You don't know sometimes how good or bad you have it until you experience something else. And I think that that's one thing that many people further realized how great and impactful the company is and was after they had a chance to work with others, right? And again, I don't want to take away from what people are doing, right? But I think that's an accurate statement. I think people understand that a lot better, and I can tell you here, I mean, from the office to the way we still dress, to the lapel pin, to many things that we do every day, we certainly learned a lot there that we take into what we do every single day. Usually we end with takeaways or any last words that you'd like to put out there before we wrap up here. Anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, just that I really enjoyed working with everybody at Guardsmark, and for any of the Guardsmark alumni. I mean, I threw out a lot of names. I didn't name everybody, but there are so many wonderful memories that I've had. Really, branches, you know, uh, working late night on our
RFP.
MBO process,
Yes.
late into the night,
Yes.
refining it, you know, making copies, presenting, the reams of paper. Uh, you know, those are all great memories. They're great people, and it was an honor and a pleasure to work with them. And I hope that in one way or another, that our paths will, cross again. We'll be happy to, collaborate on projects and do what at Guardsmark we did, which was elevate the industry and elevate it, in different ways moving forward.
So, one last question for you. What does the next 5, 10 years look like for Gus Lipman?
Well, we just started the SKL to invest in security, defense, and intelligence opportunities. Uh, Really identifying best in class operators that will impact those areas, that will help make, in terms of our national security, safer, our you know our local communities safer, make business safer, through real investing in and identifying and supporting and encouraging and building leaders in the industry. So taking that seriousness that I learned from Guardsmark about the industry and continuing to move that forward and push that forward. And I also say that in the next 5 years, we'll be very much committed also to continuing philanthropy
Hmm.
and wanting to make an impact in communities. My issues are primarily education and national security,
Hmm.
and hoping to continue to push those initiatives forward. And I have to tell you, there's a lot more to be done.
Sure.
And I am not looking for a beach. I actually enjoy the hustle and the striving.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I'm so glad that we decided to do this as our 50th episode. One of the very neat things about this podcast is sitting down and basically recording conversations with, friends and colleagues that we have privately anyway, particularly with people that have not done it elsewhere in this type of setting. So to memorialize that, I hope that many years from now I look back and I listen to these conversations. I think it's going to bring back great memories. So to everyone, to yourself, and to everyone else that's been on this podcast, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening and supporting. And it's a tremendous honor for us to do this. So thank you all. And till next time, Gus, thanks so much for being on.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.